I still have the employee badge. Every now and then, I think about throwing it away. Then I remember what happened the last time I tried. It was back in 2023, when I spent 5 weeks working at the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia. I wasn't a security guard or a tour guide. I worked for a company that specialized in digitizing museum collections. Our job was simple: remove an artifact from storage, photograph it from every angle, scan its paperwork, log its condition, then return it to exactly where it belonged. It wasn't exciting work. Most of the time, I was handling old medical instruments, anatomy models, preserved specimens, and boxes that hadn't been opened in decades. There were 3 of us on the project. By the end of the second week, I was the only one left. The first guy quit after claiming someone kept moving the archive carts during the night. The second refused to come back after insisting he found a room that wasn't on any floor plan. Everyone laughed it off, including me, until my own problem started. The museum wasn't like most people imagine. The public galleries were unsettling enough, but they weren't the part that bothered me. Behind locked staff doors were miles of narrow hallways lined with compact storage cabinets. Thousands of artifacts the public never saw sat inside gray archival boxes labeled with catalog numbers dating back more than a century. Everything had a place. Everything had paperwork. Museums survive on documentation. If one number is wrong, somebody notices. That was why what happened on my 12th day made absolutely no sense. I was cataloging a 19th century surgical amputation kit. The storage box was labeled A4172. The paperwork inside the box also read A4172. I photographed everything, uploaded the files, and returned it to the shelf. About 20 minutes later, my supervisor, Dana, walked over looking confused. "Did you already finish A4179? "No." She held up my upload on her tablet. "You already scanned it." I looked at the screen. The photographs were mine. The surgical kit was mine. But every digital record now said A4179, not A4172. Someone must have typed it wrong. Except, I hadn't entered the number manually. Our scanner pulled the catalog number directly from the barcode attached to the box. Dana checked the barcode. It now read A4179. She frowned. I guess collections relabeled it, but they hadn't. The old printed inventory card inside still clearly read A4172, 2 different catalog numbers. One box. Nobody could explain it. I forgot about it until the next morning. The box had become A4172 again. The barcode. The paperwork. Even the digital upload. Only one thing hadn't changed. The file name on my camera's memory card still ended with A4179. Dana assumed it was a software bug. I wasn't convinced. A week later, I was asked to help inventory a basement storage room while another employee attended a conference. The collections manager handed me a heavy brass key. "You'll only need this one today." She paused before letting go of it. "If you see room 8, you've gone too far." I laughed. "There isn't a room 8. There shouldn't be." I waited for the punchline. She simply walked away. The basement corridors looked almost identical. Concrete walls, metal shelving, old fluorescent lights humming overhead. Every storage room had a number stenciled beside the door. 3, 4, 5, 6. Then, nothing. The hallway ended in a brick wall, exactly like the floor plan showed. I finished inventorying room 5 before lunch. Around 2 that afternoon, I needed another box stored near the end of the corridor. As I walked back, I stopped. There was another door. Gray steel, fresh white numbers. 8. I stood there trying to convince myself I'd somehow missed it. The door looked old, not newly installed. It even had a brass keyhole polished smooth by years of use. I pulled out the floor plan. No room 8. I checked again. Nothing. When I looked back up, the number on the door was gone. The door itself remained. Just blank. No sign. No number. My heart started racing. I walked over and touched it. Cold steel, real. Not painted on the wall. The brass key in my pocket fit perfectly. I don't know why I unlocked it. Curiosity beats common sense more often than people admit. The room wasn't large, maybe 15 feet across. Shelves lined every wall, most of them were empty, except for dozens of old museum photographs, not framed, just stacked neatly inside archival boxes. None had inventory labels. I picked up the first photograph. It showed the museum's main gallery sometime in the 1950s. Visitors stood around display cases smiling for the camera. Nothing unusual. Then I noticed one person, a man standing near the back wall. He wasn't looking at the exhibits. He was staring directly into the camera. Everyone else wore suits typical of the era. He wore modern clothes. A black fleece jacket, blue jeans, running shoes. Exactly the kind of clothes someone would wear today. I assumed the photo had been misdated. Then I looked closer. The timestamp embossed along the border wasn't printed. It was part of the original negative. 1958. I checked another photograph. 1964. The same man. Different gallery, same clothes. Always staring directly at the camera. Another. 1971. Still there. He hadn't aged a day. I suddenly heard footsteps outside the room. Not walking. Running. I stepped into the hallway. Nobody. Just the buzzing fluorescent lights. When I turned back, every photograph I'd left on the table had been stacked neatly again, exactly as I'd found them. I know I hadn't done it, because one picture had slipped under my clipboard before I left the table. Now the clipboard sat on top of the entire stack, like someone had cleaned up after me. I grabbed the photo beneath it. The image stole the air from my lungs. It showed the same gallery. The date stamped across the border read 2023. That year, the museum had never produced printed archival photographs anymore. Everything was digital, but this one existed. And standing near the center of the room was me. Not looking at the exhibits, not talking to anyone, just staring directly into the camera, exactly like the man in every older photograph. I flipped it over. Someone had written a single sentence in faded pencil. New observer assigned. I dropped the photograph and walked straight out of room 8 without taking anything else. When I reached the collections office, I asked Dana a simple question. Has anyone ever worked here named room 8? She stared at me. What? I found a storage room. There isn't one. There is. She slowly opened a drawer and removed an old brass key. It was identical to the one in my pocket. I've worked here 16 years, she said quietly. I've been handed that key 3 times. She looked at mine, then back at me. And every person who found room 8 asked exactly the same question. She wouldn't tell me anything else. She only asked for my key back. I handed it to her. She locked both keys inside the drawer. Then she canceled the rest of my shift. I never entered the basement again. I wanted to quit that afternoon. Instead, I convinced myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe room 8 was part of an abandoned storage area that management didn't want employees wandering into. Maybe those photographs belonged to some forgotten exhibit. Maybe someone had slipped my picture into the stack as an elaborate prank. It sounded ridiculous. But it sounded a lot less ridiculous than what I'd actually seen. The next morning, I arrived early and went straight to Dana's office. She wasn't there. On her desk sat the brass key, the same one I'd handed back the day before. I knew it was the same because someone had scratched a tiny X near the bow of the key. I'd noticed it while unlocking the door. I picked it up. A voice behind me made me jump. I wouldn't. It was Harold, one of the museum's retired registrars. He'd worked there for over 30 years and still came in twice a week to help with old records. He looked at the key, then at me. So you found it? I asked him what room 8 really was. Instead of answering, he asked me another question. Did you take anything out? No. Did you leave anything inside? I don't think so. For the first time since I'd met him, Harold looked relieved. He closed Dana's desk drawer, locked the key inside, and motioned for me to follow him. We ended up in a climate-controlled archive filled with ledgers dating back to the 1800s. Harold pulled out one of the oldest books and opened it on a table. This museum has lost exactly 4 employees. I frowned. You mean they died? He shook his head. No. They disappeared? Another shake of his head. They simply stopped existing here. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He pointed to a page filled with employee signatures from the 1970s. There should be 22 names. I counted. 21. Harold tapped the empty line between 2 signatures. Everyone who worked here remembers signing beside someone, but nobody remembers that person's name. I laughed nervously. That's impossible. So is the empty line. I looked closer. The signatures above and below the blank space flowed naturally, leaving just enough room for another person, almost as if someone had carefully erased only one name. Not the ink around it, only the name. Harold quietly closed the ledger. The records change. That sentence stayed in my head all day, because I'd already seen records change. The catalog number. The photographs. Now this. Late that afternoon, Dana called me into her office. Without saying a word, she placed an old employee badge on the desk. The plastic had yellowed with age. The photo showed a man I'd never seen before. His job title read Collections Assistant, exactly my position. The printed name was gone, not scratched off. Not faded, just blank. Only the photograph remained. He started here in 1994, Dana said. We know that because payroll records show someone was paid. So who was he? She looked me straight in the eye. We don't know anymore. I felt a knot form in my stomach. His name disappeared? She nodded. So did every document connected to him, except the badge and a few photographs. I immediately thought about the man I'd seen standing in every old picture. I asked to see them. Dana's expression changed. What photographs? The ones in room 8. Her face went pale. There aren't any photographs in there. I didn't answer. She slowly stood up. Come with me. We walked to the basement together. The hallway looked exactly as it had before. Rooms 1 through 7. Brick wall. No room 8. Dana watched me carefully. Show me. I walked to where I'd found the steel door. There was nothing. Only painted brick. I even ran my hands across it. Solid wall. No outline. No hinges. Nothing. My mouth went dry. I'm telling you. It was right here. I believe you. That surprised me. You do? She nodded. Because I found it once. Before I could ask anything else, every light in the hallway flickered. Once. Twice. Then went completely dark. The emergency lights came on a second later. Dim red. Just enough to see shapes. Dana grabbed my arm. We're leaving. We hurried toward the stairs. Halfway there, I heard another set of footsteps behind us. Slow. Measured. Not echoing ours. Following. I turned my flashlight toward the sound. The hallway was empty. Dana didn't look back. She walked faster. When we reached the collections office upstairs, she locked the basement door. Only then did she finally speak. I heard them too. That night I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, my work phone vibrated. It was an email from the museum server. No subject line. No sender. Just one attachment. A scanned photograph. It was taken inside the archive where I worked. The timestamp printed on the border was impossible. October 1986. Standing beside a storage cabinet was a young employee wearing a museum badge. He looked directly at the camera. It took me several seconds to realize why he looked familiar. He wasn't the man from the earlier photographs. He was Harold, 40 years younger. Exactly the same expression. On the back of the scanned image, someone had typed 7 words. He opened the wrong room. So did you. The next morning, I drove straight to the museum. Harold never showed up. Dana told me he died 6 years earlier. I thought she was trying to make a joke. She wasn't. She even showed me the framed memorial hanging in the staff hallway. Harold's retirement photograph. His obituary. The date. 6 years ago. I couldn't speak. I'd spent almost an hour talking to him the previous day. Dana stared at my face. You look like you've seen a ghost, I almost told her. Instead, I asked one final question. Who has his office now? She frowned. What office? The archive office. We converted that into storage years ago. I walked there alone. The door was unlocked. Inside was nothing except empty shelving. No desk, no chair, no ledger. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye on the floor. A freshly printed employee badge. My photograph. My job title. Everything looked normal. Except where my name should have been. It was blank. I left the badge where it was and walked out of the museum for the last time. 6 months later, Dana called me. She only asked one question. "Did you keep your badge?" I told her I had thrown it into a dumpster the day I quit. She was silent for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "Check your wallet." I laughed. Then I opened it. Behind my driver's license was my museum employee badge. I don't remember putting it there. I never carried it after I quit. What bothers me isn't that it came back, it's what changed. The photograph is still mine. The job title is still collections assistant. But where my name used to be, there's nothing, just a blank white strip. Exactly like every other badge belonging to people the museum no longer remembers. Most people think the scariest thing about the Paris catacombs is getting lost. They're wrong. I got lost once. That isn't what still keeps me awake. What keeps me awake is knowing that someone knew exactly where my team was every minute we were underground, and we never saw them. 3 years ago, I was studying architecture in France when I took a summer job with a company that surveyed historic underground structures. We documented old tunnels with laser scanners so engineers could create accurate restoration maps. Most assignments were routine, and after a few weeks, I stopped thinking of underground work as dangerous. Then we were assigned to the restricted section of the Paris catacombs. Not the tourist route, the part hidden behind locked gates that only city engineers and authorized contractors are allowed to enter. There were 4 of us on the job. Mark was our project manager. Julian handled measurements. Elise operated the laser scanner, and I was responsible for recording every survey point and photographing anything unusual. Before we entered, a city engineer collected our phones. "No personal cameras," he said. "Everything stays off social media." That wasn't unusual. What came next was, "If any of you notice fresh footprints," he said, "turn around immediately." Mark laughed. "They'll probably be ours." The engineer looked him in the eye. "I didn't say footprints." He paused. "I said fresh footprints." None of us asked him what he meant. At 8 that morning, he unlocked a heavy steel gate built into the limestone wall. The sound of the lock echoed through the tunnel as it closed behind us. For some reason, hearing it lock bothered me more than climbing underground. The air was cool enough that I could see my breath. Water dripped somewhere deep inside the tunnels, and every sound seemed to travel much farther than it should have. For the first 3 hours, everything went exactly as planned. Elise positioned the scanner every few yards while Julian marked reference points. Mark compared our progress against an old paper map, and I logged measurements into a rugged tablet. It was repetitive work. The kind of job where your biggest concern is making sure every number is correct. Around noon, we reached a junction where 3 tunnels split apart. Only one appeared on our map. Mark assumed the other 2 were abandoned maintenance corridors and told us to stay on the marked route. As we walked past the junction, something on the ground caught my attention. A muddy boot print. The water inside the tread hadn't even settled yet. I crouched beside it. "It's fresh." Mark walked over and stared at it for a few seconds. "That isn't ours." "Another survey team?" He slowly shook his head. "The city told us nobody has entered this section in over 10 years. Julian looked at the print. Then he pointed toward the toe. "It's facing deeper into the tunnels." I looked back at the junction. There wasn't a second set of prints leading out. Whoever made it had walked farther underground. There was no sign they'd ever come back. Mark folded the map. "We're sticking to the plan." Nobody argued. Still, I caught myself looking over my shoulder every few minutes. An hour later, we stopped to eat. We sat against a limestone wall surrounded by neatly stacked skulls and bones that disappeared into darkness beyond our flashlight beams. It should have felt disturbing. Instead, after several hours underground, it had become strangely normal. Elise reached for the laser scanner. Then she froze. "Did one of you move the case?" The black equipment case she'd left beside her backpack now sat nearly 15 feet farther down the tunnel. None of us had touched it. Mark thought she'd forgotten where she'd placed it. Then we noticed the trail. A long drag mark stretched across the dusty floor. Someone hadn't carried the case. They had pulled it. The trail disappeared around a bend we hadn't explored. Julian picked up his flashlight. "I'm checking it." Mark grabbed his arm. "No. What if someone's down here?" Mark didn't answer immediately. Then he said something that instantly changed the mood. "If someone is down here," he glanced toward the darkness, "I don't want them knowing we're here." Nobody spoke after that. We packed our equipment and continued working. The tunnels became narrower. The ceilings dropped lower. Even our breathing sounded unnaturally loud. About 40 minutes later, Elise suddenly stopped walking. "Listen." We switched off the scanner. For several seconds, nobody heard anything. Then, footsteps, slow, steady, somewhere ahead of us. 1, 2, 3. Then silence. Mark immediately switched off his flashlight. The rest of us did the same. The darkness was absolute. I couldn't even see my own hand. Nearly a minute passed without anyone moving. Then a tiny white light appeared far down the tunnel. It wasn't moving. It wasn't searching. It was simply there, watching. I whispered, "Should we call out?" Mark answered before I finished the sentence. "No." The light remained perfectly still for almost 20 seconds. Then it disappeared. No footsteps. No voices. Nothing. None of us mentioned it again. We simply finished the last survey point as quickly as possible. When Julian checked our position against the map, he frowned. "We're off." Mark looked over his shoulder. "How far?" "About 40 meters. "That's impossible." We followed the mapped tunnel the entire time. Paper maps don't drift, neither do limestone tunnels. Yet according to every measurement we had taken, we weren't standing where we were supposed to be. Mark blamed a calibration error and ordered us to head back. As I turned around, my flashlight swept across the tunnel wall. At first, I thought it was graffiti. Then I realized the scratches were bright white, fresh. Someone had carved 4 words into the limestone. "You passed us twice." I stopped walking. The cuts were clean enough that powdered stones still clung to the letters. They couldn't have been there earlier, because we'd already walked through that exact tunnel. I didn't tell the others. I couldn't. Because there was only one thing more frightening than finding that message. Someone had carved it after we'd already passed. I caught up with the others without saying a word. For the next several minutes, I kept telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe another maintenance crew had entered through a different access point. Maybe the engineer had exaggerated how isolated this section really was. Neither explanation felt convincing. When we reached the 3-way junction again, Mark unfolded the paper map. Then he frowned. "We came from the left tunnel." Julian immediately disagreed. "No, we came from the center. You watched me mark it." "I watched you mark something, but it wasn't the left tunnel." The argument lasted less than a minute, but it was enough to make all of us uneasy. There were only 3 passages. We had entered through one of them. None of us could agree which one it was. Before anyone could say another word, Elise pointed at the floor. The footprint. We all looked. The muddy print was still there, except now there were 2. One pointed deeper into the tunnels. The second pointed back toward us. The water inside both prints still glistened under our flashlights. Someone had turned around after we passed. Mark grabbed the radio clipped to his backpack. "Surface Control, this is Survey Team 3. "Do you copy?" Only static answered. Julian tried the backup radio. Nothing. Both radios had full batteries. Neither could reach the engineer waiting above ground. Mark looked at all of us. "We're leaving." No one argued. The walk back should have taken less than 40 minutes. Instead, after nearly an hour, we found ourselves standing in front of a limestone wall marked with black painted numbers. 1. Took 2. 3. 4. 5. 6. 7. 7. There were 2 number 7s. Same paint, same handwriting, same age, as if whoever numbered the wall had somehow counted the same section twice. Julian quietly said what everyone was thinking. "We've already been here." Mark shook his head. "No, we haven't." He held up the paper map. Then his face went completely blank. Every pencil mark he'd made throughout the day had vanished. The map looked brand new. No route, no measurements, no notes. He turned it over, searching for another copy. There wasn't one. "I know I wrote on this," he whispered. I believed him. I had watched him do it. Elise's breathing became noticeably faster. "We need to pick a tunnel." Mark nodded toward the passage on the left. 5 minutes later, we were back at the wall with the 2 number 7s. Nobody said anything. We tried the center passage. The same wall. Then the right. Again. The same wall. 3 different tunnels. 1 destination. It made no sense. Julian slowly lowered his flashlight toward the ground. Fresh boot prints crossed the dust. 4 sets, walking side by side, exactly like a survey team. Mark crouched beside them. These weren't here before. I recognized the tread immediately. 1 pattern matched Mark's boots. Another matched Julian's. Another belonged to Elise. The 4th matched mine. I stared at my own footprint without speaking. It looked as though another version of our team had walked through that tunnel before we ever arrived. Mark stood up. "We're following them." Elise looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "If those are ours," he finished her sentence. "Part, then maybe they lead out." None of us had a better idea. We followed the footprints for nearly 20 minutes. Every turn they took, we copied. Eventually, the tunnel opened into a wide quarry chamber unlike anything we'd seen all day. There were no walls of skulls, no display lighting, just rough limestone and a folding table standing alone in the center of the room. A battery lantern cast a pale glow across the floor. Beside it sat a metal thermos, 4 paper cups. The coffee inside was still warm. No one touched it. No one even moved. Mark slowly swept his flashlight around the chamber. There has to be another entrance. Julian searched every wall, solid limestone. Only one way in, the same tunnel we'd just used. Elise noticed something lying beside the lantern, a laminated sheet of paper held down by a small rock. She picked it up before anyone could stop her. Across the top, in large black letters, were the words, "IF you found this before 5 o'clock, leave now." Below that was a list of 4 names: Mark, Julian, Elise, mine. Each name had a small box beside it. Every box had already been checked. At the bottom was one final sentence. "Do not wait for the Seeken group." Nobody spoke. The silence in that chamber felt heavier than the tunnels themselves. Mark turned the sheet over. Nothing. No company logo. No signature, no explanation. Just that warning. Without another word, he made the decision for all of us. Leave everything. We abandoned nearly $30,000 worth of equipment where it sat. The scanner. The tripods. The batteries. Everything. Nothing seemed more important than reaching the surface. We had been walking for less than 10 minutes when we heard voices. 4 of them. At first, I thought another survey crew had finally arrived. Then I realized something that made every hair on my arm stand up. One of the voices sounded exactly like Mark. Another sounded like Julian. Another sounded exactly like me. Not similar, not close. Exactly. The conversation echoed through the tunnels, but the words were impossible to understand. It was like hearing a recording played from another room. Elise stopped walking. "Please tell me you hear that." Nobody answered, because we all did. Mark didn't even look back. He simply said one word. "Run." We sprinted through the tunnels, no longer caring about maps or measurements. Every few minutes the voices returned. Always 4 people. Always just out of sight. Always sounding closer than before. Then, without warning, daylight appeared ahead. The steel gate. The city engineer was already waiting. He unlocked it before we reached him. Mark grabbed him by the arm. "There are people down there." The engineer looked past us into the darkness. "How many?" 4. For the first time all day, the engineer's expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. He quietly locked the gate behind us. Then he asked a question I'll never forget. "Did they see you?" Mark hesitated. "I don't know." The engineer looked relieved. "Then you were lucky." Back at the field office, he separated us and took individual statements. Oddly, he barely asked about the footsteps. He wasn't interested in the radios. He didn't even ask about the voices. He only wanted to know one thing. The laminated warning. He looked directly at me. "Did it already have your names on it?" I told him it did. "All 4 names. Already checked." The engineer closed his notebook and didn't write another word for almost a minute. Finally, he stood up and walked into a records room. When he came back, he was carrying a cardboard archive box that looked older than I was. He set it on the table between us. "This never leaves this office." Inside were incident reports, photographs, and newspaper clippings dating back almost 20 years. He slid the first photograph toward me. It showed another surveying team standing outside the exact same steel gate before entering the restricted tunnels. There were 4 people. They were smiling. The date printed along the bottom was 15 years earlier. "What happened to them?" I asked. "They never came back." I assumed he meant they were found dead. He shook his head before I could finish the question. "They were never found." He handed me another photograph. It showed the same 4 people loading equipment into the tunnels. Then another. The rescue operation. Police officers. Engineers. Search dogs. The report beside the photograph stated that every piece of equipment had eventually been recovered. Everything except the team. The scanner. The tripods. The radios. Even their helmets. All neatly stacked together inside a quarry chamber. Exactly where we had left ours. I felt my stomach tighten. "The chamber with the table," the engineer nodded. "It wasn't there." "What?" "Our rescue team found your equipment exactly where you described." He paused. "But there was no table, no lantern, no thermos, no paper cups, and no laminated warning." I stared at him. "That's impossible. So is what happened to the first team." He opened another folder. Inside were copies of every statement written by the search crews. One sentence appeared again and again. Several officers reported hearing voices deeper inside the tunnels. The voices were never identified. The search continued for 6 days. Then it was called off. The engineer leaned forward. "You're wondering why I asked about the footprints?" I nodded. "Because every team that disappeared reported them first. And the warning?" His expression became unreadable. "You're the first team that's ever mentioned it." Before I could ask another question, he placed one final photograph on the table. It had been taken just before we entered the catacombs that morning. Someone had photographed us standing outside the gate. Mark, Julian, Adelitis, me. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then I noticed the timestamp. It was wrong. According to the camera, the picture had been taken almost 3 hours before we arrived. The engineer quietly turned the photograph over. On the back, someone had written a single sentence in blue ink. They listened this time. Nobody in the room spoke. I asked who wrote it. The engineer said he had no idea. The handwriting matched no one involved in the investigation. A week later, our company officially ended the project. The city hired another contractor to finish the survey. I never learned whether they completed it. I didn't want to know. Life eventually returned to normal. I finished school, moved back home, and tried to forget everything that had happened beneath Paris. Then, almost a year later, Mark called me. He sounded different, quieter. He asked if I still had the work boots I'd worn that day. I told him I did. He asked me to check the soles. I laughed and told him he was being ridiculous. He didn't laugh back, so I pulled the boots out of my garage. The mud from the catacombs had long since dried and cracked away, but something else caught my attention. Pressed deep into one sole was a white powder I hadn't noticed before. I scraped a little into a plastic bag and mailed it to a friend who worked in a university laboratory. A few days later he called. He assumed it was some kind of joke. The sample contained crushed human bone. I told myself that wasn't surprising. The catacombs contain millions of human remains. The powder could have come from anywhere. Then my friend asked a question that made me feel sick. "Where did you get it?" I told him. He went quiet. Then he said, "That's strange. What is? The bone isn't old." I didn't understand. "It hasn't been underground for centuries." He hesitated before finishing. "It appears to be recent." That was the last time I ever spoke to him about it. I threw the boots away the same day. Sometimes I wonder if the engineer was right. Maybe we were lucky. Maybe whatever was following us never actually caught up. Or maybe it did. Because every now and then, usually just before I fall asleep, I hear something that takes me straight back to those tunnels. 4 people walking at the same pace. Just out of sight. And every single step sounds exactly like my own.